Welcome everyone, Christine here. Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg is declaring herself cancer-free, according to an article that's on Political based on a CNN interview, which is fairly exceptional because she's dealt with cancer 4 times in her life so far. In 1999, she was diagnosed with colon cancer, got treated, survived it just fine. Then in 2009, she got diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. Then in 2018, she fractured the rib and they found out she had lung cancer. And then most recently in 2019, her pancreatic cancer returned. But now she is declaring herself cancer-free. And on top of that, actually, the Supreme Court itself as an institution is declaring that she is fine. So she's a fairly sturdy woman. What can you say? Most people would not survive 4 bouts with cancer. Certainly not at the age of 86. As she is right now. From Politico. Ruth Bader Ginsburg says she is cancer-free. The 86-year-old Supreme Court Justice made the declaration after a series of health issues in recent months. Ruth Bader Ginsburg remains clear of cancer, Supreme Court Justice told CNN this week. "I'm cancer-free. That's good," she told the outlet in an interview published Wednesday. Ginsburg disclosed her most recent brush with cancer last summer, completing a 3-week course of radiation therapy to treat the malignant tumor on her pancreas. In a statement, the Supreme Court said the tumor was treated definitely and there is no evidence of disease elsewhere in the body, and that no further treatment was necessary. The declaration comes after the 86-year-old justice, who has risen to an iconic status among liberals in recent years, dealt with a series of health issues over the past 12 or so months. An appointee of President Bill Clinton, she missed oral arguments for the first time last January after she recovered from surgery to remove 2 malignant nodules in her left lung, which were discovered inspecting damage to her ribs from a fall. She returned to the bench in February and received the pancreatic cancer diagnosis in August. Ginsburg had already beaten the disease twice, having been treated in 1999 and 2009. She was hospitalized again just before the last Thanksgiving with chills and fever, but was released a day later. And then there's her interview with CNN, and she professed a clean bill of health, which CNN noted she delivered while sounding energized and speaking animatedly. Is short to sue fears on the left that she'll remain in her seat on the court for the foreseeable future. And of course, there's a bit more to that. You can check the article and the link in the description. So yes, certainly a fairly impressive situation, an exceptional situation for Ginsburg. There are not many people will handle it. If anyone watching has a close family member like myself that has dealt with cancer, you know it's never that simple. It's never that simple. What Ginsburg has dealt with basically is cancer that has metastasized. Basically, it spread from one organ to another, from one part of the body to another. So she's had colon cancer, pancreatic cancer twice, and then lung cancer, effectively. And she's handled herself quite well despite her age, and so it's fairly exceptional. And I think that she is going to outlast quite a few people, certainly quite a few people that are currently right now in politics. Though of course there's always speculation, there's always discussion about her state of health, but you know, it's always tricky. Some people get diagnosed with cancer and they think they've gotten over it, and then they get metastasized, and the cancer metastasizes, and then they end up passing away a couple of years later. I mean, for me personally, the most significant case, and this is more so as a video gamer than politically, was the case of John Bay in Total Biscuit. Was a fairly big tragedy. So not many people would be able to handle this kind of thing as well as Ginsburg has done so, and certainly not at her age. But of course, the reason this gets brought up in the news, the reason this gets talked about, is because of the nature of the U.S. Supreme Court and the political divide, or I guess ideological. It's not really political. It's an ideological divide between conservatives, quote unquote conservatives, and liberals, quote unquote liberals. It's a bit more complicated than that. That's how the media portrays it as, is it's a bit more complicated than that between the two sides. But you could say the conservative wing, which holds a majority of 5-4 majority against the liberals. Now, Ginsburg is one of the most liberal Supreme Court justices, and certainly has garnered quite a reputation. She's also the oldest, or one of the oldest, I believe, of the Supreme Court justices. So obviously people are concerned. And there are a couple of reasons why that is, to explain it. Obviously, there's conservatives who won't say this openly, but they do believe this, who would like to see her gone from the Supreme Court because that would give them an opportunity to fill that seat, especially right now. That's how they feel about it. That's... Few people would admit it openly. Certainly, very few politicians would admit it openly because the backlash would be enormous if you'd say something like that. But that's how they do feel. And there's rumors that apparently the Trump White House has a plan prepared. Yeah, you can make out of that whatever you will. For the liberals, of course, they would lose their minds. If Ginsburg retires, for instance, or passes away because of her health issues, then that's a fairly big deal for them. So what Ginsburg is doing here, based on what I can tell, she's trying to calm people down. And in a sense, she's also trying to prevent the Supreme Court. I think, at least would be my guess. I mean, I think the Supreme Court wants to avoid another politicized issue like the election, like in the 2016 election. Scalia's death certainly played a pretty big role in that particular election. So the Supreme Court itself would, I imagine, very much prefer to avoid a repeat of that situation. So I think that's what Ginsburg is doing over there. But realistically, let me say it in a different way. If, say for instance, the majority on the Supreme Court would tell, like say for instance she gets replaced by a conservative, an example, Trump stays president for the next few years, Senate remains in Republican hands, just not talking about what's going to happen, just saying, theoretical example. Let's assume that happens. Well, then that conservative majority switches from 5-4 to 6-3. And what does that mean? Well, there is a conservative majority. There's been one for a while, but because it's a thin one, then not all cases, and actually quite some significant ones, don't go the way that conservatives want in the United States. Obviously, you have the Obamacare decision. You then have the gay rights, the gay marriage decision, things like that, right? I mean, obviously, some important decisions do go their ways, such as Citizens United, as a particular example, as a significant example when it comes to stuff like that. But if that majority switches from a 5-4 to a 6-3, then it's far more likely that liberals will not get their way on the Supreme Court, and conservatives will. And I think that just speaks very ill of the entire American political process and the judicial process, that basically, people are thinking, oh, is this person going to die? And if so, are we going to get what we want? Because that's what's happening. It's pretty disgusting, actually. It's pretty shit, really, on quite a few levels. Like that's what people are thinking. It's a pretty piss poor situation, because that's how they're thinking. It's about judicial activism, or it's about having their people on the bench who can decide in their favor. That's how people are thinking. And it just says how broken Congress is. It says how the entire American political process is, and how politicized the courts can become, or have really become more. The judicial process certainly has become politicized. The courts, not quite the courts themselves, not judges themselves, but the process, the nomination process, absolutely. So that is obviously fairly significant when it comes to it. Now, one of the things to be said here is that the chances, let's assume Trump gets reelected, the chances, I'm going to say it plainly, and I say it from a medical perspective, given the fact that she suffered 4 bouts of cancer, 2 of them recent, the chances of her being able to survive another one, fairly low, especially given that she's dealt with pancreatic cancer twice because it spread to other organs. So it is an open question Like, who knows? Maybe she survives 15 more years. Who the hell knows, right? It's difficult to say. I mean, certainly the fact that she's dealt with 4 bouts of cancer, fairly exceptional, but it would have to be an exception on top of a very exceptional case to begin with. So maybe she does that. It's hard to say. You know, there's always outliers, and she certainly has access to very good healthcare. But it is something that people should at least know about. Something that I will say here is that it's unlikely, and just from a medical perspective, it's unlikely that if, say, Trump gets reelected, she'll be her life expectancy, so to speak, was probably not it's not going to be that much greater. It's just, at least that's the norm. Then again, she's already shattered the norm, so who knows exactly what's going to happen. But anyway, this is significant, obviously, because of the Supreme Court, because of the judicial decisions, because of the legislating from the bench, because of a broken Congress, which is going to remain broken. Here's the thing. Congress is not going to change. I mean, even if a party gained a majority in Congress, the chances of them actually passing legislation, as we saw with Republicans controlling both houses of Congress, is still fairly low. So the courts have taken an outsized role, which should be down to the legislators. And this is why this kind of discussion is happening. This is why people in Washington, D.C. are thinking about it. This is why the Trump White House is thinking about it. This is why it's such important news that Ginsburg is cancer-free. Costin here, signing out. Thank you all for watching, and stay tuned for more.